Richard C.K. asks, what about a U.S. guarantee of non-intervention in Iran in return for their abandoning quest for a nuclear weapon?
I think this would be exactly what you'd like to look for in what I would call this grand bargain. And what I like about this kind of a deal is that it doesn't just force Iran to give up the highest card in its diplomatic hand without getting anything back. Diplomatic negotiations are only successful if everybody leaves the table feeling like they got something. And that's what we need to do with Iran. One of the things we really can give Iran that Iran wants is legitimacy and security. That's a good quid pro quo. I don't feel like this nuclear crisis will spiral inevitably. I really think that it's amazing that we're just sitting back and every day more centrifuges are spinning in Iran and we're just waiting to see if something will happen or somebody will bomb somebody. We're not taking an active role. And I'd like to see us try to draw the Iranians into a negotiating posture by telling them, now we're not insisting that you only negotiate on the one issue we care about. We're also willing to negotiate on issues that you care about.
Great, thanks. Another question is, who is on the leading edge of history here? The U.S., Israel, and Saudi Arabia on the one hand, or Brazil, Turkey, Iran, and let's say China on the other?
It's certainly true that although the United States is not necessarily declining in power in the absolute, it is declining in power, relatively speaking, because other countries have risen. I do think the United States has tremendous ability to maintain its position in the world. Our economy, despite everything, is still very strong. Our innovation technology is still very strong. Our military is very powerful. Nonetheless, our future power depends on our ability to change with the times. This actually is the key to Turkey's success in the world as a country. Turkey started out as a dictatorship. Then when dictatorships were no longer acceptable in the world, it became a democracy. Then when closed economies were no longer acceptable in the world, it opened its economy. Then when human rights violations were not acceptable anymore in the world, it stopped its torturing people in prisons. The United States has to be able to do that too. In a sense, what it means is that in order to preserve 80 or 90% of our power, we have to agree to give up 10 or 20%. But America's still not ready to accept that. I think America's still thinking, no, we're going to keep 100%. And there, I think you run into the danger that you might have a crash and lose a whole lot more.
So Liz Leaf would like to know how she can sign up if you lead another trip. Where can she find out information?
The travel agency in California for which I led that tour was Distant Horizons. So feel free to call them, although you might know the story of what happened to me when I showed up at the airport in Tehran to lead that tour. All the Americans are taken aside when you come into Tehran, and they go through the passports separately. And we waited a while, and after about half an hour, a guy came out and said, "I'm sorry for the delay, but there's a problem with one of the passports." I immediately, of course, knew it was me. And sure enough, the immigration chief called me into his office and said, "You are a journalist, but you are trying to get into our country on a tourist visa. Why?" So I thought I'd really outsmarted them because I was a journalist, but I was going in on a tourist visa and they'd never figured this out. Maybe it's not quite as easy to outsmart the Iranians as some of us think.
Liz Leaf also asks, she's read your books, fabulous. What other books on Turkey and Iran might you suggest?
Well, I like a book. I like books about Turkey that are written by my friend John Freely. He writes more about his history of Turkey. I also like the books by Orhan Pamuk. If you want the most political one, he wrote that book called Snow. But I thought his last book, which was a love story, The Museum of Innocence, which also takes place in Istanbul, is also a fascinating slice of Turkish life. As for Iran, there's a whole list of wonderful Iran books. Let me just single out one or two. There is a great book by Hamid Dabashi called A People Interrupted. And a couple of my other favorite books are, a couple of my favorite authors writing about Iran are Vali Nasser Ali Ansari, and there's a new modern history of Iran by Fakhreddin Azemi, the Quest for Democracy in Iran, which will give you the entire 20th century history of the country. And if you sign up for my course about Iran this fall at BU, Boston University, you'll be assigned that book.